I don't know if you're a science fiction or a Star Wars fan. First season of Andor, they had the guys working in prison. They essentially turned it into a game, right? A very sadistic game, but
Yeah,
they
yeah.
had gamified the result there.
I wear a Whoop. It's gamified sleep performance.
I've been wearing a Fitbit for a long time and I've gained 20 pounds during that time. And it's not the Fitbit's fault. The Fitbit works great, right?
If it's adopted incorrectly, it's viewed as Big Brother or a whip. Again, that comes down to leadership, the way they use the data. Lean, Six Sigma. One of the downfalls of that is the administrative burden to execute those strategies.
It's not the system that is the challenge in most cases. It's the people in the process. What you're paying for is that overall Deloitte intellectual property and so forth. You have no idea if the person that's actually coming has been on the shop floor, if they understand how things work out there. We've been out there our whole careers, just part of who we are.
So, Tim, thanks a lot for taking time to join me today on my podcast. I've been following you for at least 3.5 years, specifically your YouTube channel, Visual Decisions, which I thought was an interesting name. And I've really learned a lot from, how you get the basics are so important before you start talking about technology. And I really learned a lot about the whole lean process, the Six Sigma process from a lot of the presentations that you've done online. So thank you for
Like,
that. And it's really a pleasure to have you on my podcast.
so I started working with systems that collect information directly from the machines on the shop floor back in the early 2000s. What I found was that the fears of the traditional lean people was that if you didn't have the people recording the data themselves, that they wouldn't feel ownership of that. And what we were able to do in implementing these different systems was to eliminate the waste of that manual data collection effort, but still have the people involved in that process by just utilizing that information to actually improve the process. So you still get that ownership, you still get that feeling of involvement from the staff, but you're actually making higher level use of those people than you otherwise would.
Yeah.
And Taiichi Ono talked years and years, decades ago, about the purpose of the Toyota production system is to create thinking employees.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean writing stuff on a wall. That means actually using that information to do something with it. So over time, I've really focused on how do we get the right information from the shop floor? How do we put that in the hands of the right people? How do we put those little visual controls on the shop floor and so forth? And really use all of that to make significant improvements in efficiency and the effectiveness of the operations.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I've always found it contradictory where lean, one of the main objectives of lean is to remove waste. And so, in order to remove waste, you add a lot of things in data collection, paperwork, recording, et cetera, et cetera. And
Yep.
so the theory makes a lot of sense, but practically, sometimes because you add in all of these manual steps, it actually ends up being an administrative burden and it becomes a tick box exercise and less effective is what I think it could be. And it's almost like digital has been created to make lean more effective, almost.
In many ways, yes.
Yeah. And
And yeah, go ahead.
yeah, so and what's really interesting for me is that you've worked your way through literally from the shop floor, having built up this experience at Black& Decker and Cummins, obviously wearing safety shoes. And I often say, if your consultant hasn't worn safety shoes long enough, then you shouldn't be listening to them because then they're talking a lot of theory. And I think it's really important. I think there's lots of people that kind of jump to the advisory role with not having spent enough time on the ground. And I think digitization and improvement on the shop floor is very different to sort of typical business operations because what happens on the shop floor with an operator and a machine is very different, and you got to experience it to understand the nuances of what might work and what might not work. So I
Yep.
think that's why I kind of resonated with your webinars and the talks that you do on YouTube because I think you get a sense, or I got a sense that You've kind of been there, done that, and literally with the safety shoes. But I thought before we dive into sort of the topics for today, where we talk about how we sort of bridge the gap between lean, Six Sigma, digitization, maybe just talk us through your journey. How did you get to the experience that you've got now?
Sure. So I started off back in the early 90s with Black& Decker, working as a manufacturing engineer there. And then went to Cummins Engine for a while, working again in the manufacturing plant in Columbus, Indiana, learning a lot of different things about the manufacturing process and how all of that comes together and so forth. Both of them were really good jobs that gave me a really high level overview of the manufacturing process. Then for a while, I went to the software side of the world. My old boss from Black& Decker called me up and asked me if I wanted to come in, and I said, sure. And so I went to the software side for a while, and then had Toyota as a customer for a number of years and really got deeply into lean manufacturing. And eventually I went to a lean manufacturing consulting company and worked in lean for a while. And what I found was that I got frustrated because all the different lean tools are based on data and information and so forth. But a lot of the traditional lean implementations don't utilize automation in the collection or analysis of that information.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of people doing tick marks on pieces of paper, walking over a whiteboard and writing on the pasteboard, what they produced that half hour or that hour. And I got frustrated because there's so much waste involved with that process. And we were trying to eliminate the waste from the system. And here we are putting more waste in.
And so, how did you lean into starting up
Decisions.
yeah, visual decisions?
Um, so it was 2002. The company I was with at the time was struggling with the economic
Yep.
situation back then with the dot-com bust and so forth. And I just made a decision that rather than being at the mercy of somebody else, I would like to take my passion for improving manufacturing and just run with it. And so I created my own company and basically bootstrapped it and have been running it ever since then. So
That's
done well,
amazing.
I guess.
The and I guess that's a second piece of experience that I think comes through your talks is that um, there's a difference when you're bootstrapping it and the advice that you give directly impacts the money in your pocket. You got to make damn sure that the advice that you give is worth something.
Yes.
Whereas if you're
uh,
working for some big corporate kind of that often that the value proposition gets hidden in the big picture of the whole story, right?
yeah, I mean, when you're working with Deloitte or somebody like that, what you're paying for is that overall Deloitte intellectual property and so forth, but you have no idea if the person that's actually coming to your door has been on the shop floor, if they understand how things work out there. As you say, you don't know if they've, worn the steel toe shoes and so forth.
Yeah.
And uh, for me and, the people that work with me, um, we've been out there. We've been out there our whole careers and working on the floor to make things better, as well as in the office and so forth.
Yeah.
And so it's just part of who we are.
What would you say has been the one sort of moment or project that you would feel is that's made you feel the most proud?
Interesting question. There's a number of customer success stories that I could go through, but some of the work that I'm doing with the U.S. National Smart Manufacturing Institute, CESMI, CESMII, if you're going to look it up in the audience, it has been very rewarding because I'm working at that national level. It's always been my goal to make an impact on manufacturing more broadly. And that's why I do so many podcasts of my own and write so many articles and so forth. And that work has given me a chance to work with the Smart Manufacturing Institute to create training for standardized training around digital lean, and also to work with them on smart manufacturing assessments and roadmaps. And so, probably those areas are where I'm most proud of the larger level impact that we've been able to make.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think that's well done. That's really amazing. I certainly think that it's a fantastic opportunity for you to work with them because I've certainly got value from what you've put out there. And I live in South Africa, and we have machines around the world, but I live in South Africa, and your content has helped me. It's certainly helped. I've shared it with a lot of customers in India and in South Africa. So it's certainly getting an impact beyond just the US borders. And working together with Sesame, I think, is a massive opportunity. And I think they've scored big time with getting you to do that, I think.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Um, and I know that obviously you've prepared a couple of slides, and maybe before you dive into it, I think that the as we mentioned, I think Lean Six Sigma, one of the downfalls of that is the administrative burden to execute those strategies, although they make perfect sense. And it's almost like digital has been I don't want to use this word incorrectly, but it's almost been a godsend for those two systems because I think a lot of people think that it's either lean, either Six Sigma, or either digital. And it's actually not that. I think it's the combination of all three that makes it really valuable. And
Yes.
then I know that in your presentation, you're going to touch on this idea of roadmaps because what I've also realized is that customers are struggling with where to start. How do I start? How do I measure where I am? And how do I go forward from here? Because you get overwhelmed with all this information and buzzwords and digital transformation and industry 4.0 and IT OT and all these kind of buzzwords. And I think guys on the ground that are, operating facilities day in, day out don't have time to educate themselves. They just kind of want to get some guidance on how to go forward and trust that the guidance is right. And I think with Sesame, you've built up these roadmaps that I think make perfect sense on. It's almost like a how do I get started, right?
Right.
Um, so I'd really appreciate it if you could go through the slides that you've prepared, and if you don't mind, I'll kind of ask you questions as we go along. And I think the audience would
Sure.
certainly benefit from what you've worked on.
Okay. Sounds great. All right. So, some of the background here is that Sesame's charter as an organization is to democratize smart manufacturing. And so they're looking at how can we make this easier for people to not only initially adapt or adopt, but to actually drive success with it so that they, maintain that energy going forward. And so Sesame worked with the person that did the primary creation of this process had worked at General Mills for over 21 years running their operations at the end, and had come up through focusing on the machines and the asset health and so forth. And so the first question is, why use a roadmap at all? And I think that a big part of the answer there lies in some of the things that we'll see later on, the success rate and making sure that you not only get started, but you actually have success. You tie it into the business drivers, and you're making sure that the things that you're doing actually will make an impact for the business. The second big thing is adoption and making sure that you're doing something that makes a difference for your people so that they get excited and they actually utilize the system effectively and so forth. And third, you don't end up with all this technological debt because you're running these different experiments in different parts of your business. And you end up with a mishmash of different systems, different approaches, and nothing that's integrated as a whole that you're using as a strategic mission for the company to move things forward.
Yeah. I mean, that makes perfect sense. I've unfortunately experienced both of those problems, or all three of those problems, actually.
Yes. Yeah. As have I think we all. There are stats that I have later on in the presentation that talk about how many of the pilots stall and so forth. And we'll get a little bit deeper into that as we go. In terms of how you can go about looking at your smart manufacturing strategy, um, if you're down at the bottom here and you're thinking about products, um, you're thinking, okay, maybe we need an MES, maybe we should do asset monitoring, maybe we should do predictive maintenance and so forth. And excuse me for 1 second.
Yeah.
All right, that's better. Um, Maybe I should do predictive maintenance. And a lot of people end up going down these paths because they've been talking with a vendor and the vendor's coming in there and selling some particular solution and so forth. And it's kind of driving the thought process within the customer. And I mean, that's fine, but the customer needs to not only listen to that vendor, but also take a step back and think about it strategically and with intention of what are they really trying to do for the business. Because what they end up with, if they go about it with this product centric approach, is that they have these kind of isolated products, like we talked about earlier, these little islands of automation that may or may not succeed, may or may not get adoption, may or may not talk to each other, and so forth. The second level here is thinking about things in terms of use cases. And this is a little bit better because you have a quality team that's thinking, okay, we have too much scrap, we have too much rework. What are some of the things that we can do to address the causes of that inefficiency in our operation? And then maybe you have production over here thinking, okay, our OEE is too low. We need something that helps us address that OEE issue. Maybe you have a maintenance department that's thinking, okay, we need to be able to track all this better, get towards more predictive or condition based and away from some reactive maintenance. You've got your engineering team that's looking at different PLM solutions and so forth. So they're all thinking from a use case perspective and how it impacts the business and so forth, but they're still isolated and you're going to end up with these different pockets of different systems. Um, the other way of thinking about it is that you start with that roadmap and you start from where are we trying to be as a business? And with that goal in mind of, those overall business objectives, let's work backwards from there and think through what are the changes that we need to institute in our company in order to achieve those goals as an organization. And then what are the things that we need to do to our business in order to reach that objective. And so it starts with that intention of the overall business objectives and works backward from there and only puts those systems in place that are going to have the biggest impact on driving that overall business success. And you can tie things together and see how you're going to map out that progress over the next few years and so forth. So ends up more work up front, but generally a lot more success on the back end.
Yeah, I think that is so important. And to be honest with you, I've been guilty of product thinking because you create something that's very cool and like, novel, and you kind of you're excited about it and you try to push the product without actually thinking about the value to the customer. And yes, you are successful in the short term, but unless that product fits into an overall value proposition that is, part of a journey or a roadmap, as you describe it, it ends up being a waste of money, time, and effort for everybody, not just the vendor, but also the end customer. Um, and I think you got to have a level of maturity to think in roadmaps, right? So you kind of have it's almost like if you con it's difficult for somebody to be convinced of roadmaps if they haven't had some pain on product.
Yeah, and like I mentioned in my introduction, I've spent some time on that side of the world as part of, a software company and so forth. And I know how how easy it is to kind of get wrapped up in this is the most important thing
Yeah.
because you are so vested in it and so familiar with what it does and how it can help a customer that it's really easy to just think within that box.
Yeah.
And it's really hard for someone coming from that perspective to take that larger picture and think of the overall business processes and how all of this is going to fit together over the long run.
Yeah.
I've certainly met vendors that do so, and especially individual people within those vendors that have that larger vision. Um, so it's not impossible, but the default view of the vendor is they're trying to sell something
Yeah.
and they're trying to grow as a company, and individual rewards are set up for success for that company and so forth.
Yeah.
So it's really incumbent upon the customer to have that maturity to take a step back and say, this is a great solution. It should be part of, an overall approach, but we need to have an overall approach
Yeah.
and understand how this fits within that overall umbrella.
Yeah. Couldn't agree more.
Yep. So I think something that we'll all agree on is that there's a lot of potential value with smart manufacturing. There's so many different things that it can help with. And, down on the bottom, we see some numbers from McKinsey here in terms of some of the potential value that you could see in inventory and labor and machine downtime and so forth. And there's certainly a ton of value there to understanding my reasons for downtime and mitigating those, understanding where I have coordination issues in my material flow. And I may not be down because the machine is down. I may be down because I don't have the materials to work with. It may be something where I have quality issues and I'm understanding what are the drivers behind those different quality issues and so forth. And so that data that you get from these smart manufacturing systems can be of tremendous value. But it has to be done properly and it has to be within the right context.
Yeah. I guess solving for one of these problems, right? And not just getting data for
Mhm.
the sake of getting data.
Right.
Yeah.
So when we look at the benefits that are kind of experienced versus the benefits that are anticipated, the top three benefits that people are seeing or that they're hoping for are, operational excellence, optimized processes, improved decision making. But all of the different things here are some of the things that we've been discussing. And again, just shows what the possibilities are when you look at implementing these different systems if you have success implementing them.
Yeah.
Um, where the issue comes in is you get a lot of companies that kind of want to dip their toe in the water and do a pilot and see it working within their environment and then expand from there, right? Let's do something small, let's have success, and let's grow from there is kind of the default approach for how people want to get started with this. And my argument is that that's probably the wrong way to do it. And I might get some pushback on that, but when you start small, when you dip your toe in the water and so forth, a big part of having success with these systems is not the technology itself. Most of the different systems in the space do what they say they're going to do. It's not the system that is the challenge in most cases, it's the people in the process. An example of an IoT device that we're all familiar with is a Fitbit.
Yeah.
And I've been wearing a Fitbit for a long time and I've gained 20 pounds during that time. And it's not the Fitbit's fault. The Fitbit works great, right? It does exactly what it says it's going to do. It takes that information from those sensors, pushes it to the cloud, runs AI on that data stream and so forth, and sends back to me my footsteps, my heartbeats, my sleeping patterns, all kinds of great information I can use to improve my life. But if I don't change my behaviors, I'm not going to see those benefits. I'm not, unless I, diet and exercise more and so forth. I'm not going to see the benefits from wearing the Fitbit. And it's the same thing for putting a lot of these systems on the shop floor. You actually have to do the hard work after you put them in place to
Mm.
make those improvements. You can have the data tell you where to go, what to do, and so forth, but you still have to do it. And one of the problems with just dipping your toe in the water with a pilot is that you're counting on people changing the way that they work in order to have success with these systems. And if you only put this on one single machine, is your maintenance department going to change the way that they do their jobs overall? Is your quality department going to change the way that they do their jobs? People are going to go about things the same way that they have in the past. So you're not really going to utilize this information coming from the system on one particular machine. It's not anybody's job to do so. And so it's a technology proof of concept, essentially.
Yeah.
And guess what? The technology will work in most cases. You have to have that surrounding process improvements. You have to be able to drive the adoption, but it's hard to drive the adoption when it's only one machine and so forth. And so that's one big reason that companies stall when they do these pilots. Um, Another study, in fact, this is kind of a study of studies, shows that the failure risk is somewhere between 70 and 95%. And that if you look at the breakdown between people, process, and technology, the technology is not the problem here. Only in 7% of the cases did they find that the technology was the issue. Process change was 30%, and people not adopting the system was 63%. And again, it comes down to a lot of things like lack of alignment to business outcomes. So if you're not putting a system in place and showing people how it's going to make a difference in the business, well, why bother with it? It's just extra work at that point.
Yeah.
If there's a lack of awareness within the organization, micromanagement or mismanagement of agile teams, distraction by the day-to-day minutia and so forth, all of these, kind of line up with some of those things that we've talked about and are reasons why you're going to have issues having success with these different systems. And so while the capability or the potential for the capabilities of these systems is huge, there's also issues that you have to overcome. And one way to overcome a lot of these things is to utilize a roadmap, start with that, what are we trying to do as a business, and work your way backwards from there. Sorry, I've been talking too much.
No, this is the irony of it is it's exactly what we've experienced is the technology is not the problem, yet 80% of the effort is put in on the technology side. And not enough effort is put into the change management, people side, leadership, because it requires leadership to change people's behaviors at the end of the day. Um, and no matter what, and that's they say the cycle repeats itself. No matter what change you make, it comes down to leadership. Whether it be digital transformation is no other change, no different to any other change we've made in the past. Implementing lean, implementing digital, it still requires leadership to change the way people behave and interact and go forward. Um,
I
it's
think one of the keys there is that leadership itself has to change the way that they do their
yeah,
work.
yeah,
One of my favorite soapboxes is standard work for leadership. And having them utilize these tools and so forth within what they do, it will start to go down the organization. Because if, for instance, a plant manager has a TV in their office with the current performance of the plant and so forth, and they call people into the office during the day, or they have meetings in there in the day, and he's asking his production supervisor, uh, production management, hey, what's happening with this, what's going on with this and so forth. They have to understand what that's actually saying. They have to be able to connect that out to the shop floor and have those conversations. So now the plant manager knows what's going on in the plant because of the systems. He's asking questions to the people beneath him. They have to be able to go in there, understand that, to be able to give answers back and so forth. So it drives all the way down.
yeah. We myself and a colleague did a talk late last year at the MISA conference, and the title of the talk was Diet versus Lifestyle.
Okay.
You know,
Yeah.
what happens is I think leadership think that digitization is a project and a once-off moment and you do it and then it's kind of finished and you I don't know what they expected the outcome to be. But actually it's that's like a fad diet, right? Like you kind of
Right.
do this thing and you can only sustain it for a period of time. Eventually you go back. When actually it's actually a lifestyle change. You have to change your behavior from top down. And the title of the talk was fad diet versus lifestyle change. Which one will be most effective? And it was basically leading to exactly what you're talking about, where it's not a once-off moment and it's not about a technology. It's actually a behavioral change from leadership down.
Yep. Yeah, I like that analogy quite a bit.
Yep. I'll show you the link to the video. The talk we recorded it. We actually won a prize for
Excellent.
it, so we pretty. It was the irony of it was it was a technology conference, and we spoke nothing about technology.
I am a fan of that.
Yeah.
I think that the technology gets plenty of attention on its own.
Yep.
What needs more focus is the human side of it and the process side of it.
Yep. Absolutely.
So, for the roadmap itself, again, this is something that comes from Sesame that I've worked with them extensively on. So they have a framework that starts with these core areas here, assessing the current state. So understanding from kind of a survey basis as well as a set of interviews where the company is today, ground the process for creating the roadmap in what are the current capabilities, where do they stand in a maturity scale, and so forth. And then digging down into the interview process with that customer of, what are the drivers behind where they are today? What are the roadblocks? What are the impediments? What are the challenges that they face, and so forth? And really, what is it that they're trying to achieve is coming from the future state process. And understanding, again, those business drivers, where do they want to be in 3 years, and so forth, so that we can link back to that as we go forward. And then it's also creating that business value, the business case for all of this, and so forth, and understanding what are the key impacts that we would have on the business and how are we actually going to achieve those. And from that, we can start to actually then create the roadmap for the next 3 years or 5 years or whatever it might be. But in doing so, we're actually tying that back into all of that analysis that has been done for where are we coming from, where are we going to, what's the value of that, and what are the actual steps to get there.
Okay. Would you do this on the whole organization, or would you pick a department, or like what's the practical sort of starting point for something like this?
Depends on the size of the organization, how they're organized, how much autonomy each group has within the organization, and so forth. So if each group is run as its own business, then you probably do it within each group or division or whatever it might be. If it's a smaller company and everything is kind of run as a single whole, then you do it on the whole company.
Okay.
And so there's no single answer there, but it comes down to how the company is managed in the first place.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's really critical because I would imagine with a big organization, this is quite a lot of effort to put up front. And how do you get past the conversation with the customer when they say, okay, I'm going to invest in this roadmap exercise? Um,
Mhm.
and how do they, I mean, how's the ROI for that? There obviously has to be some almost leap of faith, right?
Yeah. Sesame's worked very hard to build the tools up to the point where it's a very valuable process to go through, but it's it's actually pretty darn low cost, and it's fairly light lift from the resource commitment as well. So in the US, depending on the size of the organization, a small company could have this roadmap done for 10K.
Okay.
So it's really not that much of an investment to make to have that good plan. Now, part of the payback on this is uh, how do you kind of raise your probability of success for actually implementing the systems and so forth? Because when we look at the roadmap here, it goes back to those earlier parts of our conversation. We're not just looking at the different technology pieces that would go into this. We're also looking at where do you stand in maturity from a operational excellence perspective. Do you have the system or continuous improvement capabilities to actually utilize this information to make a difference in your organization? Or should your first focus be on building up those muscles within your company and then look at how you can implement technology to support that? And so we're looking at all these different aspects. And the six key dimensions are leadership, strategy, and communication. Then it's operational excellence. Then we look at data-driven decision making. The next pillar is looking at workforce efficiency and workforce optimization, looking at the systems integration and system capabilities. And then the sixth dimension is supply chain.
Okay.
And so we're looking at a lot of different parts of the business to look at how we're not only going to implement the technology aspects of things and what would make the biggest difference there, but how do you drive better data-driven decision making in the organization? How do you drive the manufacturing excellence capabilities? How do you optimize workforce and augment the capabilities of your people and so forth? So there's a lot of different things that we're taking into account as part of the roadmap that are going to help you optimize that success.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, the ROI is um, interesting to calculate on the roadmap itself. It's much easier to calculate for some of the things that you would put into the roadmap.
Yeah.
But it's really avoiding failure. What we looked at earlier with that 70 to 95% probability of not achieving your objectives with your smart manufacturing investments that you're trying to at least mitigate, if not eliminate,
Yeah.
by putting the roadmap in place and doing the right things for the right reasons.
Yeah. I think it's for me it's let's say 10K is well worth spending now to learn that actually maybe your organization is not ready for it,
Yeah,
as opposed to spending 20K on some technology and then finding out the hardware and then doing a roadmap and that kind of thing. So it's definitely, in my opinion, worth doing that because it's also an option for a customer to opt out at this stage, you know,
right.
because I think that it's also important that, like I said, that maturity of the leadership needs to be there to realize, okay, I can go through this process now that I've got the roadmap, or possibly more importantly, we're not ready for this. We've got higher priorities or whatever that might be. Let's, put this in our drawer and bring it out when the time is right for the organization.
Yeah, and a lot of these systems that you're putting in place, especially for mid-sized organizations and above, you're spending 100,000, 200,000, more than that on implementing these different systems between the cost of the system
Yep.
itself, over next 3 years, as well as the outside help getting it implemented and so forth. So if you could spend an extra 10K and double your probability of success with that, why wouldn't you do that?
Or avoid a 100K loss, you know.
Or avoid 100K loss? Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's something where it makes an awful lot of sense to do that up front. Just make sure that you're picking the right area to get started with, that you have the organization as a whole kind of pointed towards that to make that as successful as possible.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. 100%. I think this is great.
Yeah, so there's a lot more detail that we could go through for that. I'm not sure if you want to spend the time during the conversation here going through those details, or if you have other questions.
Maybe what would be, I think, pretty valuable is if you could talk us through a success story.
Sure. So worked with a customer. This is a relatively new process for CESP. So they've started it They started designing it during COVID
Okay.
because one of the challenges that was out there was that companies that wanted to engage a consultant to help with all these different things, uh, based on rules and regulations at the time, were having a hard time having people on site to actually go through this process and so forth. And so this was designed back in 2021 to be something that could be executed 100% remote.
Okay.
And um, when I do it, I like to be on site for at least part of it so that I can see the plant, see the operation myself, and so forth. Get to know some of the people personally, but it can be done that way. And so it just kind of started up at that point. It's really gained momentum over the past 12 to 24 months. And so there's a number of companies. There's, I think, over 2,000 people now have taken the survey portion of this across 100 or so different companies that have at least started that process. And uh, so I can tell you that companies have gone through this. I'm working with a number of different customers that have gone through the process and had a great statement from the owner of one business that essentially they took the year one plan for this and they're now using it as their roadmap for what they're going to execute against in 2025. And so now they're 5 months in. Actually, later today, I have a check-in call with the owner of that business to see, how they're doing in that execution and so forth. But being able to take the outputs of a strategic roadmap like this and basically use it as your operating plan for the next year tells you the level of depth that this gets into and so forth and all those different dimensions of the business.
Yeah. That's great. I mean, there's no more validation than a real world use case. That's actually almost where a company has autonomously used the roadmap and actually driving their own change. I mean, that's a real win.
Yep. Yeah, and I mean, this is a company that's they're 100 years old.
Oh, wow.
They make steel, they make cutting tools,
Okay.
and so they've been making cutting tools out of Cleveland for over 100 years, and it's run pretty much exactly like you would think of a metal cutting business in
Yeah.
Cleveland would be run.
Okay.
Um, And what they recognized is that they, have a need to modernize the business, and they didn't have the skills and experience internally to look at how they should be doing that. And so for them, being able to, engage in this process pretty cheaply, and they were actually able to get it funded through the local economic development association, EDA, from a grant to pay for that process
Okay.
as a small business. And so for them, being able to get that paid for, being able to go through that for free, getting a lot of expertise coming in from the outside that they wouldn't normally have access to, and working with them to help set, given where they are today and given the capabilities that they have in house, what is something that they could actually execute against and take those steps forward, put the basics in place in year one, uh, take some real steps forward in years two and three, and really start to digitize the business as they go.
Okay. Yeah, that's awesome. I'd love to hear, keep up to date with the with that story.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, that's great. I don't know if you had any more slides, Tim, that you wanted to talk through or
There's certainly a lot more here. Um, Basically, just examples from here on out for some of the outputs of the process. So I talked about the survey up front and the current state, and that gets broken into a maturity scale from reactive to aware to collaborative to proactive to adaptive. And you can see where this kind of theoretical company would kind of exist on this scale today. And one of the interesting things that we found is that probably the most important place to have success, um, for companies that have success going forward, what we found is that the ones that have a higher score in manufacturing excellence and culture and manufacturing strategy and leadership to get started typically have much more success as they move forward with their implementations because of all those factors that we talked about earlier, right?
Yep.
Management being able to drive things from the top, having that good communication structure within the organization, having that alignment as an organization, and then having the skills and problem solving and process improvement and so forth in place to be able to utilize those technologies. But being able to see, where you stand today on these scales can be very useful. And then with the future state analysis, what we try to do is just say, where do we want to be as an organization? And then we can start to understand the gaps and what are driving those gaps.
Yeah. The key words I take from this slide are leadership and culture.
Yeah.
It's almost like prerequisites. The rest of the stuff is kind of uh, a consequence of leadership and culture, right?
Yeah. It's, uh, again, if you don't have the capability of utilizing the technologies that you're putting in place. If you don't have the right skill sets within your organization, if you don't have the processes set up for problem solving and so forth, then you're just not going to see the benefits that you're anticipating.
Yeah, absolutely. Where do you stand on gamification of data, like for an operator or anything like that?
I've seen some successes with that. I know that I'll just say a major pharmaceutical company. They put up big TVs at the end of every packaging line and basically tried to gamify things and did it with some success that essentially the different lines would compete with one another for how efficiently they could produce, what was their OEE at the end of the shift and so forth.
Yeah.
And they gave some rewards, picnics, things like that to teams that consistently outproduced others and so forth. And so that was probably the most successful uh, implementation of that gamification that I've seen because they really did raise their overall performance on a sustained basis doing that. I think that you have to have some of those small celebrations for the wins to make that successful,
Yeah.
because otherwise it just becomes part of the scenery after a while.
Yeah.
So as long as you're celebrating those victories and so forth, then I think that it can make a difference.
Yeah, for sure. Um, it's an interesting way to change culture without actually changing kind of without the leadership getting involved is kind of or indirectly involved by creating the gamification. You have that culture of drive and improvement. And
Yep.
I'm firmly a believer that 80% of the problems or 80% of the solutions on the shop floor are sitting in operators and technicians' minds. It's just not being extracted correctly because of leadership and culture. And if you can create gamification, you are autonomously getting technicians and operators or line workers to be able to apply their minds to solve the particular problem autonomously. So I'm a
Mhm.
big fan of gamification. I've seen it work proactive or well, and I've seen it work in the wrong direction, where sometimes if it's adopted incorrectly, it's viewed as Big Brother or a whip kind of thing.
Yep.
Again, that comes down to leadership, the way they use the data effectively. So rather
Right.
with the wins and the celebrations, like you spoke about, as opposed to the whip.
Um, I don't know if you're a science fiction or Star Wars fan, but in the first season of Andor, they had the guys working in the prison,
Yep.
and they essentially turned it into a game, right? A very sadistic game, but
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
had gamified the result there. So you
Yep.
don't want to gamify things in that way.
No.
You want to have it be a positive celebration of good performance and so forth
Yep.
as part of that gamification. I think that, as you say, it can be done incorrectly, though.
Yeah. I've always believed that in an organization, and I've been fortunate to travel around the world and look at different cultures and different organizations, at least 80 to 90% of people in that organization want it to be better. They
Yeah.
just don't know how. There's always going to be a 10% of bad apples. Um, and technology can actually help you identify those bad apples quite quickly. But if you make the assumption that 90% of the organization wants the organization to be better for themselves as well as the greater good, and then applying gamification to concepts can really be a step change for an organization.
Yep. Yeah. Just like with anything else, if you treat people with respect and kind of assume that they're trying to do the right thing,
Yeah.
the vast majority of the time you'll be rewarded for with better performance and everything else.
Yeah, absolutely. Just I wear a Whoop, which is obviously also a health measuring device, and it actually has made me stop drinking over the
That's
last
good.
couple of years because it's gamified. It's gamified sleep performance. So I
Hmm.
tried, and I my wife has the same thing, and I mean, the irony of it is we wake up in the morning and we ask each other how, what is your score on sleep? And we're like, we want to beat each other on how well we've slept. And alcohol has a big impact on your REM and your deep sleep. And
Right.
so we've both, just because of the device and gamification, changed our behaviors towards alcohol, which is a positive thing.
Yeah. I think the key there, though, is doing it with your wife and
Yeah.
having that kind of competition. When my Fitbit was effective is when I was having kind of step contests every week with my cousins and friends
Yeah.
and so forth. But that feature went away
Oh,
for having those weekly contests. And then we stopped comparing, and I kind of lost that motivation of having that weekly contest that, I had to uh, go out and compete in every
yeah.
week.
Well, I hope
And
Fitbit's listening because that's I mean, would be a differentiator because collecting data nowadays is pretty easy, whether it be on your shop floor or on your wrist. It's how you use it effectively is, I think, the differentiator.
I think that's an interesting lesson for gamification on the shop floor too, is that like that pharmaceutical example I talked about, the reason that was successful is because it was the different teams competing and kind of giving identity to those teams and having them kind of in that friendly competition with one another where you can get picnics and things like that as a result of it. And it's not, I think everyone was invited to the picnic. It's just that, there were, cheers for the team that won uh, during that time.
Yeah,
And so you'd end up with things like that shift would on their own start communicating during the shift handoffs. They would be telling, the shift coming in, hey, you got to work on this kind of thing because we were seeing this issue during the day. So work with maintenance to get that addressed and so forth.
that's
And
amazing.
so they started kind of self-organizing around some of those improvements.
Yeah. And that's quite interesting because what you're doing is you're having people on the same line, irrespective of the shift. So the
Hmm.
shifts are actually working with each other. They're not kind of
Right.
leaving. I don't know if you know the term a hospital pass.
No, I don't.
It's we play rugby, and a hospital pass is when you pass the ball to somebody, and the person you passed it to, there's a person about to tackle them, and the rule in rugby is you can't tackle somebody unless they've got the ball. So you just give them the ball just in time so that they can get tackled.
Right.
So that's the term hospital pass. And it's almost like the one shift often gives a hospital pass to the next shift because they kind of push their numbers and you're like, well, we've worked the machine. We know it's going to break later, but we don't care. But because you now have the let's say night shift and day shift work together, it obviously prevents that hospital pass.
Right, exactly. Um, I've seen a lot of situations where the uh, sh shift that's on will somehow amazingly time it so that they don't have to run the setup.
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
They finish their run just at the end of the shift.
Yeah.
It's incredible how that got timed out.
Yeah. And that's exactly a hospital pass, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, welcome into the plan. Go set up.
exactly. Yeah, so I mean the one question that is popping into my mind if as since you have spent time on the vendor technology vendor side, what
Mm.
advice would you give them?
Uh, my advice that I would give to the software vendors or hardware vendors, same thing, is to be more aware of um, what it is that the customer is trying to achieve and how you can fit within those overall initiatives for the customer and how you really are going to help them drive success within their organization. Because their success will ultimately be your success,
Yeah.
especially with the move to more subscription models within the industry. In order to get those renewals and so forth, the customer has to be winning.
Yeah.
And so, really think through how do you make that customer successful as opposed to just getting them sold in the first place.
Yeah. I think that's yeah, you're right. I think a subscription model, which is what most sort of vendors want,
Mhm.
requires continuous success from the customer. It's not just a once off.
Yeah. There's one of the topics that I like talking about is manufacturing entropy.
Okay.
And so the idea is that in any complex system, there's a tendency towards disorder.
Okay.
And manufacturing is the same way, that if you just leave it alone, uh, things will continually get worse until they just don't run anymore. And so when you think about continuous improvement, you have to continue putting energy into the process just to keep it where it's at today. And if you want to improve the process and continue to improve it over time, you have to put that much more energy into the process. And so, in order to combat this tendency for things to break down, if you're on a subscription model with your customer, how do you work with them going forward so that how do you set them up for success? Knowing that this entropy will make things worse over time,
Okay.
how can they utilize the things that you're providing in order to not only keep the steady state, but to actually move forward with progress? And so those are things that you have to consider. It's kind of like going back to a sports analogy. If you're a coach, how do you put your players in a position to succeed?
Yeah.
And so if you're a vendor, how do you put your customer in a position to succeed going forward?
Yeah. That's I think that can't be you know underestimated. The the cliche is the customer's king. And you
Mhm.
may be able to convince them once, but your long-term sustainability is about making them successful continuously.
Yeah. So, going back to that slide with the three different approaches, the
Yeah.
software or the solution approach, the use case approach, and, kind of that roadmap approach. Um, if you see your customer taking the software approach, the natural thing to do is to be like, great, we're going to get a sale.
Yeah.
But if they, put that in place and they don't have the adoption, they don't have the process change to take advantage of those new capabilities and so forth, then they're probably not going to be successful over the long term. So even if it makes the sale a little bit more complicated, talking to them about those other aspects of things up front and making sure that they understand, hey, there's hard work to be done once the system's in place. It doesn't automatically, magically make things better on its own.
Yeah.
Um, is going to be much better in the long term.
Yeah. Makes perfect sense. Maybe Tim, I can sort of in closing, I see there's a lot
Mm.
of books behind you there.
Oh yeah.
What would you care to make any recommendations of books or knowledge resources that maybe our audience might benefit from?
Oh, let's see. So many different areas here. I've kind of got the grab this. I've kind of got the manufacturing books in you know this center shelf here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Looking at the Harvard Business Review, going across Lean Six Sigma books, factory physics, and additional manufacturing books over there. I've got philosophy and religion and science books and history and biographies and so forth. Philosophy up there. Um, my advice would be to take a broad approach. Um, I'm someone that has benefited over the years from understanding a lot of different things and how they fit together in that synthesis, rather than, uh, you know, being the absolute best Python programmer that I could be and so forth.
Okay.
Now, we need really good Python programmers too. And so there's definite value if you're, of that mindset to go deep. For me, going broad has been very rewarding as being very beneficial over time.
Yeah. So putting the pieces of the puzzle together as opposed to designing the perfect piece of the puzzle.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I think to be honest with you, I think I'm similar. Fortunately, I'm surrounded by great puzzle designers. And I find
As you
my
should be at a software vendor.
yeah, and my and luckily because I was really bad at the other things, I've learned to be good to put the pieces of the puzzle together to actually, solve a particular customer's challenge as opposed to uh, being the best Python program. I'm certainly not.
Yeah, I do very well programming a prototype that nobody else has to ever really count on.
Yeah. I think I'm in the same. I think I'm exactly the same. It's a cool thing to show my friends. Oh, look what I did, and that's about it.
Yeah, that's really the extent of it. It's just um, here, this is how I want this to work, but it needs to actually work consistently.
Yep. Yep. Sounds good. Tim, anything else that you'd like to add in closing?
Thank you for the opportunity. Kind of going international here, looking at contributing. I've actually been to South Africa. I worked with the L'Oreal plant there. I
Okay.
had the
Yeah.
pleasure of doing that during the World Cup finals.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Did you watch
so
any games?
not at the stadium, but I was certainly in, bars and other
Okay.
venues for the events and so forth. It was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed my time there.
Well, the World Cup is in the US next year, so
So maybe you should come here.
yeah, I would certainly love to do that. Um, Tim, it's been really amazing. Thank you very much. Like I said, I've been watching your content for at least 3 years, probably longer,
Thanks.
and I've learned a lot through our journey. Yeah, so thank you very much, and I appreciate it again.
No worries. And, let's stay in touch more than once every few years.
Yeah, for sure, definitely. Thanks,
All
Tim.
right. Thanks, Yanesh.
Bye bye.
Bye.